This was Ralph Nader. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but there was something he pointed out in this clip that I thought was really important. This interview took place 2 years ago, and they were asking Ralph Nader about how he was able to fight back against GM during that time. So I just want to play this segment real quick.
And we could never have achieved what we did in the 60s and 70s if we had the Congress that occurs now, which is indentured to Wall Street, to big money, to gerrymandering, predictable elections for the most case, safe districts, lack of competition.
Didn't you have plutocrats in the 1960s? You had very wealthy Americans, the kind of people who may have owned the car companies or the banks back then?
They weren't as organized. They didn't have political action committees. When I took on GM, they didn't even have a lobbying office in Washington, D.C. Now they're much more organized, and it teaches us a lesson. When we beat them, they come back even stronger if we don't become more organized. Democracy is all about civic organization. It's not just public opinion. That's important as a brooding omnipresence, signaling to the lawmakers that the bulk of the people are behind the few activists that are in the vanguard.
Okay. I want to get your take on that. He talks about political action committees, that they didn't have to worry about that back then. It was easier for him to fight against GM. And he said, like, he couldn't do it with the Congress that we have today. And I want to get your opinion about political action committees, because I've shown like donor information on my show multiple times. And sometimes people will comment and they'll say, oh, well, that's a safe pack. That's okay. And I'm like, well, is it? I don't know. I mean, they're taking corporate money. So I want to get your opinion about political action committees. Do you think there's a such thing as a safe political action committee?
No, they're all bought off. MoveOn.org. I mean, I was involved in the whole organizing when Obama, remember, promised that we were all going to have the public option and then betrayed us. And MoveOn.org suddenly said, well, we have to support Obamacare, which is a disaster because we have to get Obama elected. Well, they were meeting with Democratic strategists every week. They've all the environmental groups get not corporate money. I mean, there are very, very, very few groups that have retained their integrity. They've all been bought off. Well, Ralph, I admire Ralph immensely, and nobody has been fighting corporate power longer, more successfully, and with more integrity than Ralph Nader. And what happened is that during the Clinton administration, there was a California congressman named Tony Coelho, and he and Clinton conspired to get corporate money. They said, we can get corporate money and we'll do corporate bidding. So we'll take back the law and order issue. Biden was in on all of this. We'll slash taxes. We'll deregulate the FCC. We'll destroy Glass-Steagall. We'll do anything you want. We'll deindustrialize. We'll pass NAFTA. And sure enough, they did get corporate money. Well, what they also did is destroyed that left wing within the Democratic Party, people like Proxmire, Fulbright, and others. Now, Ralph wrote 24 pieces of legislation, major legislation, the Mine and Safety Act, the Clean Air Act, all sorts of stuff. But then this liberal wing of the Democratic Party, or let's call it a left wing populist, they pushed it through Congress. But then these people were all eradicated. And that's why Ralph ran. He said, I have no leverage anymore in Washington at all. And that began with the Clinton administration. So Ralph, who's kind of like me, doesn't really enjoy politics too much, but the goal was never to win. Ralph never thought he'd win. The goal was to pull 5, 10, 15 million people out to begin to scare the crap out of the Democratic Party and make them respond, because politics is a game of fear. That was always Ralph's intent. And I believed and believe now that that is the only weapon by which change will occur, when we begin to step outside the system in an organized way and challenge it and frighten it. But of course, it's going to be a kind of seduction by the Democratic Party to with all the empty promises. I mean, all the campaign promises of Biden, what's he done? He didn't raise the minimum wage. He didn't forgive student debt. His Build Back Better bill is gutted. I mean, he hasn't done anything, nor was he ever going to do anything. So they'll use that, and then they'll use fear. And these figures like Trump and DeSantis and Pompeo, and they're fearful figures, but they are creations of a system that seized up and no longer functions on behalf of the American people. And so there's a huge rage. Remember that poor people of color, the reason we have the prison system as big as we have, it's 25% of the world's prison population, although we're less than 5% of the world's population. The reason we have such a large prison population, the reason we have converted police forces into paramilitary armies of occupation in internal colonies, as Malcolm called them, the reason that happened is because with deindustrialization, the social bonds, as the sociologist Emil Durkheim calls them, that knit people to a society, work, place, stability, a living wage, a stable home, good schools, all of that was taken. And so with those social bonds ruptured, then the two mechanisms for social control become militarized police and prisons. So you've essentially denuded within urban areas, primarily people of color. You've removed the men from the street, and you don't just remove them for a year or two. I mean, these sentences are ridiculous. I've taught people in prison who have life sentences and never committed a violent crime. 40% of the people in our prison system are not charged with physically ever harming another person, and nobody gets a jury trial. Only 94% are coerced to plea out. So that means the prosecutor and the police stack all sorts of charges against you. They know you didn't commit, and then they use them as bargaining chips. But if you actually go to trial and then you don't get adequate legal representation, all of those charges, and it's your word against the cops, you're finished. And that's the tragedy, because the students that I teach with the longest sentences are usually innocent. They didn't commit the crime, but they were foolish enough to go to trial. So you have destroyed, and that economic statistic that you cited is important, because black families in particular have suffered far more than white families, no comparison. But you also have disenfranchised the white working class. Half of my family, my mother's side of the family, comes out of the white working class in Maine, so I've seen it. The opinion, political and cultural and social opinions they hold are indefensible, but they're angry. It's a gun culture. They're all veterans. And the difference, and James Baldwin points this out, between, he said that there's a wonderful essay, I can't remember which one it is, but anyway, everyone should read all of James Baldwin. But there's an essay where he talks about why black people don't have a midlife crisis. He said, because when you grow up black, you know the system's fixed against you from the moment you come out of the womb. But if you're white, you can be fooled into thinking, oh, I can be anything, the Oprah stuff, I can be anything I want to be, I can achieve, but then of course you get to be about 40 and you realize your life is a dead end, like I'm talking about, the uneducated, unskilled working class is a dead end. And that's created the kind of rage that we're now seeing, that is contributing to the rise of this Christian fascist movement. I've called it proto-fascist movement, whatever you want to call it, but this kind of very frightening authoritarianism. And it is a way, look at Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's a total nutcase. But these people feel victimized, and they're not wrong. They have been victimized. And the more vulgar, the cruder, the more these people speak in the language of violence, the more popular they become. And so I spent 2 years writing a book on the Christian right called American Fascists, the Christian Right in the War in America. And I came to the conclusion at the end of the book that the only way to break the back of the movement, because they all engage in magical thinking. Hannah Arendt writes about this. When life becomes just so unpalatable, you create a world of irrationality to cope, and you can't argue these people back into the rational world. That the world was created in 6 days, and Adam and Eve, who were real people, lived with dinosaurs or whatever. You can't do that. It isn't going to work, because you're attempting to push them back into that fact-based, reality-based world that almost destroyed them. And the only way to break the back of the movement, I wrote the book 10 years ago, is to reincorporate these people back into the economy and into the society. And of course, we've done the opposite, and now we're paying for it. But the Democrats bear a tremendous amount of blame. In some ways, worse than the Republicans, because it used to be in the old Democratic Party pre-Clinton that labor had some voice, that there was some, they took in, it took into account labor as a force within the party. Well, they abandoned labor completely. That was Clinton. And Thomas Frank wrote a really good book, really funny book about this. He goes to one of these Clinton meetings in Boston. Everybody should read that chapter. It's hilarious, with all these kind of, liberals, how we're all going to be entrepreneurs and all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, the Democratic Party is as culpable for where we are as the Republican Party.